faceoff. Shoots it, deflected, right in. Pietrangelo save, rebound. Stopped by Pietrangelo. I don't believe that save. Neither does Peter Stastny. He can't believe the save that Pietrangelo just made on him as Frankie Sparkly. Now that maneuver there to stop and rob Peter Stastny. He should get 5 to 10 for that.
Hello and welcome to episode 116 of Tendy Talk, presented by the Hockey Podcast Network and the BLPA Podcast Networks. I'm your host, Joe, better known as Wash Up Goalie on social media. How about that? 2 weeks in a row with the new episode and on New Year's Day to boot. This week, I chat with former Western Michigan and Providence College goalie Austin Cain. So, without further ado, let's get to Austin. Austin, hey, thanks for joining me on the podcast. It's always fun to talk to other goalies and especially college goalies. You know, you're kind of in that fun time of life where you may think you got a lot of responsibility, but it's just good grades and play hockey.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I appreciate the invite here. As you know, with any goaltender, right? It's I don't. If you're a goalie and you don't like talking about it, then it's probably not the position for you, right?
Yeah, well, it was my last recording was with Grant Fuhr, and here's a goalie who hasn't strapped the pads on in a few years, but it's goalie to goalie, it doesn't matter. We just like sitting down talking about the time on the ice, time in the locker room, and it doesn't matter what skill level you've played at. It's all the same. You talk about catching a puck. We all know that feeling. Or getting a puck off the pads. We all know that feeling. Doesn't matter what level you played at.
It's such a niche market, right? Especially, Canada, U.S. hockey is such a game of substance. It's so big, but like goaltending is just such a small community. It's unbelievable. So many people to learn from, but everybody somehow knows everybody. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it is funny. There's that, 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon, but when we try playing that degree of separation from other goalies, it's really, as I've thought about it, it's maybe 3 degrees of separation. When you start getting down to it, it's, my goalie coach or my goalie partner, just thinking about, my background, my goalie coach from youth hockey, he's got some crazy connections. One of my college teammates is the Devils goalie coach. So that opens, a bunch of doors. And then just having this podcast, some of the goalies I've been very fortunate to have connected with and talked to, that have competed at the highest of high levels, both on men's and women's side of things. It's fun.
Yeah, for sure. Right. And even if you think about yourself as a little goaltender too, you remember your first interaction of, okay, this guy's kind of a big deal, right? Or maybe you're watching the kids in juniors and big goalie walks by, taps you on the pad kind of thing. And then fast forward a couple of years and you're that guy, and it's pretty special. But you always remember, your first interactions with some of the big names when they've happened, or your first game or whatever. And so it's definitely cool, being older and getting to be on the other side of it a little bit, and just because you remember how special it is, right? And I think that's something that is special for hockey players, but particularly with goaltenders, I think. Connect a little bit more than
goalies get each other.
Right?
They really do. And to your point, I remember going, as a youth hockey player, going to see what wound up being my alma mater, seeing some of those high school games, and the goalie would give you that fist bump, or you give them the tap on the pads, and it was so cool. But then, when I got older, and I remember working hockey camps in college, and at the end of the week, kids asking for my autograph. I'm like, you guys realize, like, I'm a bench warmer. You don't want me ruining your shirt like that. But they're like, no, yeah, it was a fun week, and it's crazy. And you talk about just the awe of other goalies. I remember talking to Eddie Belfour. I'm a big Blackhawks fan, grew up in Chicago. Yeah. And my first Hawks game was on New Year's Eve at the old Chicago Stadium in the last year of the stadium. And I was so upset because I saw Jimmy Waite come out of the up the stairs at the old Chicago Stadium. And I knew that meant Eddie wasn't starting that day. And I told Eddie that, and he goes, I was probably just as upset as you were because I wasn't playing. And that's something I think all goalies understand too. It's like, we have that drive. We want to play. We don't care what our coach or our body says. We want to play every game.
Yeah, and I think more than anything too, right? Our favorite team growing up was kind of dictated by who was in net rather than, oh, this team's great. So I know that was certainly the case for me, and it's changed a little bit now that I've gotten older, and since finishing school, a lot of the guys I graduated with or played with that have gone on and taken that next step, I get to watch them, and so that's the team I cheer for now, right?
Yeah, it is funny as you get older. I mean, there's that one goalie that's like your guy, and I was fortunate. My guy played in my hometown, so I'm a Blackhawk fan through and through. But as you get older, you have a little more respect for. You don't want to say respect, but appreciation for the game and just good play. Where I hated the St. Louis Blues, and of course Curtis Joseph was their goalie at the time. But it's like I look back at it now, and it's like he's pretty fun to watch. He was a pretty good goalie. He was also the reason I hated the Blues because he was beating the Blackhawks. And same with Felix Potvin. Like I hated him because he ended the season it's like, but as you grow older, you have that appreciation for watching those games. It reminds me of that scene from Anchorman when he walks in on his dog who had torn apart the room or whatever. And it's like the other goalie plays well and just beats you. You're like, I'm not even mad. I'm impressed. I like what I saw.
Yeah, you definitely the appreciation changes a little bit, as you grow up and as you get older too. I can tell you that. So I was a big Blackhawks fan as well, and a lot of that was because my best childhood friend, his cousin, is Corey Crawford, and so you can imagine.
Oh, really?
Like, this is my second family kind of thing, and I didn't have a ton of interactions with him, but he's from Chateauguay, Quebec, a couple hours from us. But as I'm kind of trying to go through it in juniors and college and trying to make the jump to pro. And this is somebody who not only did it, but excelled in the dynasty era for a team like Chicago, right? And so that was...
He was a great goalie for a young goalie to idolize too, because he was just so calm back there. As a fan watching him, it's like I never felt like he had that temper that a Belfour had. He never had those lapses in games that you might see other goalies. He was just like, he was steady Eddie back there. And he was so technical too. I loved watching Hasek and some of these other goalies, but I always think back to my goalie coach. He's like, those highlight saves that you see, it's because the goalie was out of position. Yeah, Crow had a few of those, but not as many as you would think. His saves are just so technical, and some people might have thought he was boring to watch, but not me.
Well, he's a big guy, right? And so a player like him, if you watch him play, it's the obvious takeaway is he's a blocking style goaltender, right?
Yeah.
He can make those reactionary saves when he needs to, but it's kind of like, it's tough. I don't like comparing guys because everybody's so unique, right? But Price is a very boring goalie to watch, right?
Yes.
It's so easy. It's so effortless because his positioning is so good. He knows he's a big guy, but when you understand percentages, it's such a numbers game, right? You understand the percentages, okay, here's what I cover. And on top of reading everything in front of you, then it's boring. Boring is good, right? The spectacular stuff is certainly fun to watch, but it's exhausting and unnecessary, right? Potentially.
Yeah, it's funny too, because the casual fan thinks, a 0-0 hockey game with two great goaltenders who are technically sound is boring to watch. But then to, the astute hockey fan, we're like, this is amazing. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, my dad was in town and we took the kids to an ECHL game, and we were sitting behind the goaltenders, and it was like, yeah, this is pretty nice. And the kids were like, this is a little boring at times. I'm like, no, watch his footwork. Look how his angles and his depth. That and of course the goalie was Matt Vernon, so he maybe had a decent goalie coach as growing up. The car rides driving home, he maybe did listen to his dad.
The East Coast is the coast is its own beast, right? That much more respect for the guys that are still going through it, because it's talk about playing your own game and thinking about your angles and depth and everything that you're thinking about at high level hockey, right? And then throwing kind of all the mess that comes with the coast sometimes, right? There's that much more resiliency for those guys. Vernon's a guy I played against. He was at Colorado College when I was at Western, and he
Yeah.
walked in and took over pretty quick from them. Not the biggest guy, but boy, can he move. He's a fun guy
Yeah.
to watch.
Well, in the coast today versus coast 5-10 years ago, it's a completely different game. There's a lot more respectability to it. You know, you're seeing more guys come from the coast wind up in the show. They're starting to use that as a feeder system and not just hide guys down there anymore. But especially goalies. You know, when you look at the depth chart, you don't want that number 4 goalie on your depth chart just sitting behind your number 3 guy in the A. So they're starting to send them down to get playing time. But before the game started, my dad asked me, he's like, you know, skill wise compared to the AHL. And he, you know, him and my mom had season tickets to the Wolves for a number of years. And of course, going to Blackhawk games, he's like, you know, skill level, what's the big difference? I said, watch the passing. That's the difference between the coast and the AHL, the crispness of the passes. And it was about 10 minutes into the game. He goes, yep, I see it. Well, as a goalie, that's harder because you expect those passes to be tape to tape. And then when they aren't, maybe you get caught out of position a little bit because of your movement. There's those little things because even in college, I think the passing's maybe a little bit better at times than in the coast because you're practicing 5 days a week.
Well, and there's a reason for it too, right? So I do a lot of work now with an agency. I'm a new life in hockey, we'll call it, and you know, the coast is tough because it's not consistent, and it's not consistent because of the difference in contracts. So you have so many guys, right, that are part of the parent system, their draft picks, AHL contracts, whatever it may be, and then you've got the guys that are on the East Coast FPC, and there's so much movement after that first month, whether it's injuries or I think it's come end of November, December, there's further number restrictions for how many guys they can have on the roster, and so those guys get dropped, and that's why I mentioned it being just very unpredictable. But that unpredictability really translates on the ice, right? Every game you could be playing with a different line mate or on a different team, or the contracts really don't mean a whole lot, and so that's, in my opinion, why we see maybe some inconsistency. You got players
they don't get that chemistry.
No, they don't have the opportunity, but you also have players who are young and this is step one and they're trying to get to that next level. And then you've got guys who have been at that level or have kind of found their spot in the coast and know that, maybe this is it. And the effort level, sometimes there's maybe some differences there, right?
Yeah.
I've seen it. And so it's definitely tough. I do like what they're doing though. I think there's a lot more visibility and a lot more that they're trying to do just to grow it. But it's tough, and it's even tougher for goaltenders, especially right now. The last 2-3 years in the minors have been very, very tough for goaltenders.
Yeah, well, and I love the conversation we're having, but I want to go back to the beginning with you. Something I like to ask all goalies: how did you even get started in the game of hockey? What got you like, hey, I like what I'm seeing here. I want to try this out.
That might be the funniest story of it all for me. I hated hockey. I especially a kid growing up in Canada doesn't compute, right? But I remember my dad's from Toronto, and he'd have try and get me to sit down when I was young and just watch a game with them, and for whatever reason I just was not interested. Most boring thing. And the extent that I remember for in terms of timeline here was I was maybe grades 3, 4, so not that old. And I woke up one day and was like, I don't know if it was a dream I had, but I distinctly remember waking up one morning and I'm like, this is what I want to play. And so at that point in the year, it was too late to sign up for anything. And it just so happened that I go to school and they're handing out flyers for an outdoor hockey league for beginners that were neighboring towns for me. And so we signed me up. My first year, I cried every game because I was so cold because it was outdoors, and kind of never stopped for the next 20 years.
Yeah, and nothing wrong with that. And sometimes those outdoor skates are they're character builders.
I was just gonna say it builds character, right? For mom and dad too. Hockey's not a cheap sport, especially in Canada, So we see
Yeah.
how bad I want it before they make the investment. I guess maybe that was their evil plan.
Yeah, I've said it before on the podcast. My dad always joked with me. He's like, "Why couldn't you have stuck with soccer? I would have bought you a new pair of cleats and shin pads every year." He's like, even mid-year, what we would have seen. He's like, nah, but no, you had to pick hockey, and on top of that, you decided you wanted to be a goalie. And it's like, well, Dad,
Goaltender.
to
Yeah.
be fair, I didn't decide I wanted to be a goalie. I was born a goalie. Goalies are born. They're not made. So that leads to the next question: what made you want to be a goalie?
And so that's where, to your point, I think maybe I'm the outlier where the decision was made for me. That's how I say it. So we're filling out the form to sign me up for this outdoor league, and you could pick
Yeah.
position, right? At this point, it's like, nobody knows what they want to do. They just
Yeah.
want to get on the ice. And I remember sitting down with my mom, and if you ask mom, she'll tell you differently, but this is how I remember it. It was her. She was the executive decision maker. That we're gonna be a goalie, and the reasoning was, I don't want you to get hurt. Hitting. We're still a couple of years away from it, and so again, fast forward. Not even 20 years. It must have been maybe 5 years later. And it's the majority of my life has been nothing but bruised clavicles and ribs and.
Yeah.
So I'm sure she regrets that one now. It's this funny story within the family. Every game that I get in there, she can't watch until the first shot has already happened, and then she can kind of take her first breath. All right, he's good, he's got it.
We've all heard of those moms who just can't watch the game because they're too nervous. Because in their eyes, the game is on our shoulders, and goalie moms are special in many ways.
Yeah, so we'll blame her for that one. But to your point, the decision was kind of made for me. But I joke a lot that if I had done this and gone through all this as a forward, maybe the career would be a little bit different. I don't see have ever been a possibility, right? So even though it was, like I said, mom's call, I think you're right to an extent. I don't know that I would have been cut out. We've all had those practices where you switch with a couple guys, switch equipment.
Oh yeah.
And every single time growing up that I switched, I would end up playing D, and I was still trying to block shots. And so, a little counterproductive. We're still trying to eat pills and with less equipment. So I kind of just was like, all right, yeah, I think we belong in that here.
On one of my beer league teams, one of my teammates, he plays goalie on his other team. And there's been a few shots where, he's playing defense and he's getting back there. I'm like, hey, I need to see. You got a great angle, but your depth is way too far out. I need to see. Or, there was one shot, he put his glove out like this trying to catch it. And so now before games, I'll look at him and be like, hey, Kevin, look, I got the goalie gloves. You don't want to try and catch it tonight. He'll just start laughing. But those practices when you let your teammates, play goal, I always looked forward to those because I always picked the teammates that would always say, they'd either pick on my play or say goalie's easy or anything, because after they've had the pads on for one good practice or scrimmage, their tone completely changes. They have a little more respect for the position in those that play it.
I'd never advocate for maybe a Christmas, we've got no games coming up, let's have some fun. I wouldn't ever advocate for that being kind of a regular occurrence, right? But I do think that there's some advantage into it. It's like what you said, right? There's always that divide between goaltending and the rest of the team. And I love it. It's the worst part, but the best part at the same time, right? You lose a game 6-0, but you had 65 shots and everybody's quiet on the bus, but you can have that little, I felt pretty good about how I did. Nobody else gets that, right?
Yep.
But
that was my last game. I had 60 shots and I stopped 51 of them. I'm going, I played pretty damn good, even though I let in 9.
That was my college commitment game. So I can't, like I said, it's the worst part, but the best part. But I do think that the only true way, like you mentioned, in order to kind of bridge that gap with everybody else is you can't understand unless you're put in that position, right?
Yep. Yeah, and you're dead on too. Is you don't do it often. It's that Christmas skate that you usually have, this
Yeah.
week of the year or the end of the season. All your games are over, but you still have a few practice times. And in
Right.
fact, it was my senior year of high school. Our season was over, but we still had another practice. So we're like, all right, we're just going to scrimmage. And so I let one of my teammates wear my stuff, and I skated out. First shot and warm-ups, I'm coming in. He just dives out to poke check. I go over him so I don't, crash into him. I come down. My hand goes this way. My thumb goes this way. I'm like, oh, Jesus, I just broke my thumb. And so, the assistant coach is looking. He's like, well, do you want to get your stuff off? I can take you to the hospital. It's 2 blocks away. I'm like, it's my bottom hand for shooting. I'm like, I can still stick handle. I was like, and it was at the rink I worked at. So I grabbed an ice pack, put it down in my glove, and skated the rest of practice. And it hurt like heck. But I was like, hey, I can still make passes. I'm not going to be, ripping the puck around. But so I finished that up, got home, and it was probably 11:30 by the time I got home because we had late practices. I woke my dad up. I said, Dad, I think I broke my thumb. And he's like, well, let me look at it. And he's looking. He's like, yeah, it looks broken. He starts getting up. And I go, what are you doing? He goes, well, we got to go to the ER. We got to get this taken care of. It's like, it's almost midnight. If we go now, we're not going to get home till 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. He said, let me shower up. My sister was a nursing student at the time. I'm like, I'll have her tape it up when I get out of the shower and we'll go in the morning. He's like, I like that even better because he had to work the next day at the firehouse. So he's like, your mom's going to be the one sitting in the ER with you for a couple hours, not me. And so we did that. And it was funny because my sister, she was a junior nursing student at the time. And I come out of the, it's like, hey, I need you to tape my thumb when I'm done. I think it's broken. She's like, okay. And so I come out of the shower and I'm holding it there. And she's like, well, what do you want me to do? And I'm looking at her, I'm going, you're in your junior year of nursing and I'm a senior in high school and you're asking me what you should do. And she's like,
yeah.
Well, yeah, what should I do? It's like, you got any of those tongue things, where you go, and she's like, tongue depressor? You go, yeah. And she's like, yeah. I go grab 2 of them and a bunch of tape. And so she brings them to me. I'm like, how do you think I'm going to open this with one thumb? Open them up for me. So she opens them up. I put one on either side of my thumb. And I say, no, tape the crap out of it. And she just, and we went in the morning and the doctor looked at me. He goes, well, that was effective. It wasn't broken. He said I would have been better off breaking it, but and how I didn't tear all the ligaments in here, he's still not sure, but it was severely sprained and I had a cast on for like 8 to 10 weeks. But yeah, try buttoning a shirt or tying a tie with one thumb. You can't. I learned that really quick. And I learned that because I went to a Catholic school where we had to wear a shirt and tie every day. And so I showed up to school wearing a polo shirt. And the first person I saw was my principal. And he goes, wow, Mr. Drennan, why aren't you wearing a shirt and tie? And I just held up my cast. And he's like, fair enough. He goes, but that doesn't answer why you don't have a shirt, a button-up shirt and a tie on. I said, Mr. Antos, have you ever tried buttoning a button with only one thumb? And he kind of looked at me like it was a stupid question. He's like, no. I said, well, try it. So he unbuttons his top button, and then he starts doing it. He goes, I'll be darned. That is something you need 2 thumbs for. He's like, it can be done, but it's not easy. And if you got to do a whole shirt, no way. So he's like, all right, well, if any of the teachers ask, just tell them, I was like, just hold up my cast. He's like, yeah, just hold up your cast. That'll do. So, yeah, fun times. So your mom gets you into the net, but clearly you were made for it. At what age did you start to think, you know what, I'm not too bad at this?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've seen the pathway to hockey as always being very linear. There's a lot of opportunity out there, but especially I think for a position like goaltending, sometimes you got to find it, especially now, right?
Yeah.
Things don't, not everybody has the privilege of having stuff just kind of fall in front of you. And, like I said, I woke up that one morning and was like, this is what I want to do. That kind of attitude, from mom and dad's perspective, I'm sure it's like, all right, we'll try this outdoor thing. We'll throw them in that, maybe it lasts 1-2 years. At that point, I had gone through a couple sports. I had done some soccer. I had done some, all the typical little kid run around to get the energy out, so mom and dad get left alone sports. And yeah, I guess, the hockey drive just never stopped. I don't know that I ever had, I think I can do this. It was more
Mm-hmm.
like I have to.
Yep.
And as you get older, you get a little more realistic about certain things too, right? And um, the obvious dream when you're a kid is I want to play in the NHL, and then you grow up a bit, and that doesn't change, but you learn just how hard it is.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's a numbers thing, like the how small of a percentage of guys actually make it, and so your thinking changes, right? You break out into, you have smaller goals for yourself, or maybe it's I want to play at the highest level as possible for as long as I can, and I was able to rationalize my career that way with
Mm-hmm.
myself, and
Same.
um, yeah, it just makes it easier, right? So there's no disappointment of, well, I'm 23 and I'm not playing in the NHL. It's okay, I'm 23 and I'm at school right now. Okay, that's the next step. And then, by the time I was graduating at 25, okay, so let's make that pro jump. Let's get our foot in the door kind of
Yep.
thing. It was never ever an easy, all this opportunity is coming towards me kind of thing. I just genuinely think I enjoyed it, and I was a lot more passionate about it than a lot of other guys I played with, and it showed, because fast forward, being 27 and like just under a year out from playing, and most of those guys I grew up playing with have been done for a long time, right?
Yeah. That's the way I looked at, I played Division III JV hockey for 4 years, and,
Yep.
some of my teammates, I look at them and it's like that high school game, that was the last time they pulled a jersey on for competitive hockey before the beer leagues. Whereas I got 4 more years out of it, and because I was playing, NCAA hockey, not club hockey, like it was 4 years of free hockey, and I was getting my education at the same time.
Yep.
Then I had my teammates who did go and play ACHA club hockey, and of course this was 20 years ago, where club hockey wasn't nearly what it is today, and we would have the arguments back and forth, like, well, I'm still playing college hockey. It's like, you're playing hockey with your college name across it, but you're not playing college hockey. And they're like, well, yeah, but, and it's like, yeah, it's like it's a different beast. They said that God love you, you're still playing and having a good time, but there was just that certain level of appreciation of knowing that I don't want to say this is the end of the road, but knowing that this is my peak and I'm going to enjoy every moment of it. And if you're playing Division III hockey, yeah, guys have gone on, but I think most guys know it's the end of the road. But I don't think enough of them think of it the way I did, or you did of your college career, where it's like, let's appreciate it for what it is, and not be disappointed if we don't go beyond this.
It's the whole idea of controllables, right? What's within your spectrum of controls and what isn't, and I think that's where realistic expectations come from, and where a lot of guys go wrong, right? And so the perfect example is, okay, I think maybe this is my peak. Let's enjoy it, and I'm not happy with my situation, because then you're ruining some fantastic experience for yourself.
Yep.
I got caught with that a lot when I hung them up, trying to figure out life after, right? It's so easy to be miserable.
Yeah.
And when you're not playing and you're not at the rink every single day, and but it's changing so frequently, especially goaltending. I think it's something that very few will ever understand. I think the unfortunate reality is the guys that make the decisions often don't understand. But that's why
Yes.
we need people, we need platforms like this, to help grow it. Like I said, you could have a kid grow up, be a hockey player, mom and dad maybe played hockey, but none of them were goaltenders. It's still
Right.
brand new.
Well, and I'm encouraged that more NHL teams, they don't just have goalie coaches anymore. They have goaltending departments. My buddy Dave, who's with the Devils, he's the goalie coach, but Marty Berder's the head of the goaltending development, group. And more teams have that, so that when they are making decisions about goalies, it's not just, we had some scout that doesn't really, it's like, no, they have people that truly understand goaltending evaluating these folks. Now, when you talk about the controllables in college, for me, my controllable was how fast I could open and close that door.
Yeah, right.
that was my deal. So, you're a Canadian kid, you're coming up through the ranks, but you went the American college route. What attracted you to Western Michigan?
Yeah, it was kind of a surprise how it all happened, and I guess that's, I'd say maybe more the case for a lot of goaltenders than forwards. So I know for me, college was the goal,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of that was because I knew that in my life everything had kind of happened like a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody grew at this age, and then now I'm taller than them all, but it took that extra year before I got that growth. And
Yeah.
so I kind of started to notice this as a trend when I was pretty young. And then, I think as I was growing up, people started to realize, I think goaltenders need that little bit extra to develop too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most guys, if you ask now, you hear all goaltenders hit their prime later, and
Mm-hmm.
so I'd known that the college route, one, other than looking just substantial, which it is compared to going to school in Canada. Just there's a lot more money in it. The facilities, the travel, all of that is just you're a rock star for 4 years, right?
Yep.
And I knew it would give me more time, and I was ready. I had Victor Junior. I had a Blainville had reached out to me about going to camp out of my last year of minor, and I said no. I don't even want to. I don't know all the rules. I didn't have an advisor or an agent at that point, and I don't even want to touch the possibility of losing eligibility.
Yeah.
And so I didn't go. But what happens in Canada is, you're 16, you get entered in that OHL draft, you get picked, because it's the first big thing that gets thrown your way, especially if you're from a family who had never really gone through it before, right? It's You're like, I'm going to the NHL. This is it, And the unfortunate
Yeah.
reality is, a lot of those guys, you make it your first year, like especially as goaltenders, that window to actually make it and be a regular is so small that if it doesn't work out, you're in the junior A league. You can't talk to schools. And so as I kept going, and I was playing junior A and I was playing in Toronto, we had a lot of guys from Owen Sound and from Oshawa Generals in the OHL, and we'd go to showcases, and one being in Buffalo, and where Canisius is, and um, scouts would come in after and talk to guys, and they had to sit there. These players had to sit there at 18 years old and watch everybody else talk to schools, and
Mm-hmm.
so for me, it was the difference between your career just starting at 18, 19, or thinking about what am I going to do for work, or where do I go to school? Like, how can I
Mm-hmm.
prolong it? And I knew that I needed the time, and I didn't want to have to make that decision before I needed to. So that was kind of why, school was, thank God it worked out, but I was kind of all in at that point.
Yeah, well, and it's a very mature way of looking at it too. That, like you said, most kids at that age aren't thinking long term. They're not looking 2, 3 years down the road. They're looking at right now, or hey, I want to say I played in the OHL, not realizing that this route might be a little bit better. And we're starting to see more and more high end players coming to the NHL that are coming out of
Yeah.
the NCAA, because I think um, teams have realized, hey, these guys are spending 4 or 5 days a week practicing. With I loved that college football schedule where Monday through Thursdays practice, Friday, Saturdays games, and
Yep.
there's so much development that happens in those 4 days every week that I think the NHL and other pro leagues are starting to take notice of that.
Yeah, and again, it's that extra time even for players, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm with my clients right now. I'm obviously very biased towards the school route, but you're right. Like, we are seeing the numbers shift. I think it's a third of NHL players currently are
Mm-hmm.
coming from the NCAA, right? And that's only going to grow the way I see it. But maybe they come out older than some of these guys out of major junior. But I think they're a lot more prepared, right? When
Mm-hmm.
they leave NCAA, they step in, and like the top guys step right into roles and are full-time NHLers, right?
Yep.
it's impossible to predict whether that's 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever. But the point is, we don't see a ton of them come out and drop right away. I think oftentimes these major junior guys will sign or they'll get drafted. An even smaller percentage probably steps in, and that's got to be like top of the top for their country, for their age group. But I think they see more time in the minors potentially than somebody more mature who's been through it. I think the other thing too is, like I said, you leave, you've got that much more time. But for us, we had it's a rigorous routine. Your time isn't your own. The schedule's minute to minute. I know you had one of my old goalie partners, Trevor Gorsuch, on earlier in the year. So he talked a little bit about what it was like under Andy Murray, and everybody had their opinions, but he ran a tight ship. And regardless of if you bought in or you got along or you believed in what he was preaching, every single guy that I played with or I lived with from that school, whether they're playing right now, more so probably the guys who are done playing, wouldn't have changed a thing. They just feel so much more prepared. You're persistent, you're punctual. There's no excuse to not work hard because he drilled it into us for 4 years, 5 years for some guys, right?
Yeah. So, let's talk more about Western Michigan. I've been to that rink. I've been on that campus because I had a youth hockey buddy that moved out that way, and so we would go visit him. What brings a Canadian kid to Kalamazoo?
Yeah, so I was mentioning the commitment game for me was a 5-0 loss against number 1 team in our league, but it happened to be a showcase game in January of my overage year. So opportunities running thin. I had talked to 10 Division III schools at that point, and you had kind of decided, okay, if Division I doesn't work out, the big one doesn't work out, then maybe I'll start looking in Canada. And so I was talking to University of Waterloo, University of Toronto, just trying to get everything out in front of me. And I play that game, we lose 5 rip, but I ended up having 60 or 65 shots. And so that was that perfect example of, and they had given out, because it was a showcase game, a player of the game. And so it was me and the other goalie. We both got player of the game, and so that was pretty special. But it's that example of you hop on the bus and it's quiet, but you got that little smirk and you're holding that crystal puck, player of the game, and you just lost 5-0, 6-0, whatever it was. But I knew the numbers were there, and so it was funny that, again, I've always found in my career that when I least expect things to happen, or I stop I'm a very obsessive person, especially with hockey, but when you finally take that step back is when stuff starts to progress forward, right? And so we got back from that showcase game, and we're unpacking the bus, and coach comes up to me and he goes, "Call me when you get to your billets. It's a Division I." That's all I'm going to say. So that was the longest 30-minute drive back to the billets of my life. This is the call I was waiting for. So I call him, and he ended up saying, this is actually a funny story how this all happened, but I mentioned that nothing really just kind of fell easy in front of me and in my plate, and this is where you go. And so I go to my billets, I call coach, and he goes, "Western Michigan," gives me the coach's name that was there. He says, "Look, he had to run to another game. He didn't have the time to sit and chat afterwards, but he wanted to meet you, and I think it'd be worth reaching out." And so maybe 5 minutes after I hung up the phone, I had gone to the school website, and granted, I didn't know a ton about Western Michigan coming from Canada. I was a guy who idolized, I don't know why, but Ferris State, Michigan State, I thought were the coolest schools ever. And then you get to college hockey, and no disrespect to them, but you start learning about the NCHC or Hockey East or the different divisions that I played in, were it's just the NCHC, right, notorious for however many years in a row that national championship came from that conference, right? Yeah. And a lot of them were schools that from Canada, I had never heard of them before until I got there. So anyway, I had done some research, and I shot an email right away to Coach Murray and the assistant who had seen me, who's now with St. Cloud. And I looked up their course programs. I said, "Here's who I am." I didn't mention them even coming to watch me. I just said, "Look, I love the school. I know you guys you've got a senior leaving. Here's the programs that I'd be interested in taking based on my credentials from high school," and kind of just gave them no excuse. I put everything out in front of them where they didn't have to do any work. They just had to answer if they wanted. right?
Well, in leading with the education, that's a good one too.
Yeah, right. And that was always, I give a lot of credit to my parents for this, because the deal was, if the grades aren't there, then neither is hockey. And
Yeah.
so,
Yep.
I was kind of always in the middle attack, I'd say, and didn't really excel much until my last years of high school, because it was like, okay, now it's crunch time. And, if school, which was such a, far-fetched idea at the time, if that was going to be a possibility, there were certain things I needed to accomplish along the way. So I was
Yep.
comfortable with my grades. SAT score, I did well the first time around. So I knew that was all there. It was the only thing left was performance and get somebody to see me. And now that had happened, right? And
Yeah.
so it was maybe 3 days later, I get a call on my phone from a number I don't recognize. And it was the coach from Western that had been at that game to see me. And he goes, "How the hell did you know we were there?" And I didn't want him to know. So I kind of was like, I had no idea. I just lifelong fan, just kind of said what I needed to say. If they hear this now, they might give me a little guff, but yeah, that's kind of how it happened. I just had laid everything out, gave them no excuse essentially, and then every week, at least once a week or every 2 weeks for the rest of the season, because this was end of January at that point, so only two and a half months left in the season
Yeah.
for them, and same for me. I'd shoot a text or just try and hop on a call and just like, "Hey, do you need anything else from me?" And just try to make it as easy as possible without being so annoying that closes the
Yep.
door. So it wasn't until after my junior season, we were done the day of junior hockey. Our season ended. It was actually funny that we lost in 7 games in the first round of the playoffs, and the other goalie it was Newmarket we were playing, was the other guy up for the job with Western Michigan. And so that series was very, very personal for me, obviously. But to
Yep.
lose for a little bit was like, this is it. It's not going to happen. And then like I said, I drove home. I moved back home to Ottawa. I texted coach, said, "Hey, season's done. I'm home. Just so you know, would love to chat again. I know you guys are going to the tournament. Good luck. I'll be watching." And they ended up losing to Air Force. And it was a week after their tournament game that I got the call from him saying, "Look, this is what scholarship looks like. This is what the options look like. Next step, if this is a go for you, we'll set you up with Coach Murray." And then yeah, it was maybe less than 24 hours after that follow-up call when they got back that the commitment happened. It happened very, very fast for as long as the process from initial contact. But that's kind of how I ended up there. By no means did it fall in my lap, but yeah, I don't know. Easily the best day of my life though when that call came. I could tell you minute per minute.
Now, whenever I talk to a college goaltender, I always like to ask the question of, what was the major? Because as my coach has always said, it's student athlete, because the student comes before athlete. So what was the major?
Yeah, and that's a tricky one, right? Because I feel like I honestly, like I said, even now I feel like everything happens that much later for me.
Yep.
So the grades for me were, I need to get them so that I can play hockey, not
Mm-hmm.
I need to get them because this is what interests me. So I could tell you that the one thing, like, I'd set myself up to jump into something in like kinesiology. That was what all the
Okay.
athletes wanted to do. And
Yeah.
towards the end of high school was like, okay, some of these classes are a little bit harder than I thought. And so
Yeah.
I ended up switching to law. It runs in the family a little bit. My grandfather conveniently was my biggest supporter when I was younger for hockey. He was a lawyer, had his own practice. And so I'd switched and really, really had taken a liking to it. And so when I got that commitment to Western, I knew their law program was, I think it was only a year old. So initially I was pre-law. And then after my sophomore year, I decided, before I jump into this, I'm sure there's a time commitment here. I'm still fighting, especially as a goaltender, right? There's only so few games and I want to get as much as possible. And so what's that ideal balance? So I sat down with the dean at Western of the law school, and the net of what he had said to me was, it's new, we're still figuring a lot out, but there's some 4.0 students who are having trouble right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like it's a 5-year commitment minimum, where every other major for everyone else is you're in, you're out, and you're 4, right? And at that point, I was never considering 5 year being an option.
Yeah.
So long story short, we switched to marketing. I didn't say that I had any super, like huge interest. I knew that, I was doing a general business minor, but the head of the marketing department also happened to be one of the biggest fans of the team. And so I knew she had appreciation. There was by no means like a special treatment, but appreciation for the athlete schedule that a lot of other professors are kind of like, they see it as, no, not that he's juggling a bunch of things. It's, well, he's taking time away from my class and he doesn't really care. And that wasn't the case with her. And so I thought it probably just made the most sense, surround myself with the support that I need so that I can do what I have to do at the time.
That's awesome. Law school takes up a lot of time. My niece is a senior at Washington University in St. Louis. She's finishing up her law degree, and it's like, I'm a slow reader to begin with, and it's like, there's no way I could ever go through law school by the amount of reading she has to do. It's just ridiculous. But yeah, it takes a special person to get through all of that, and to do that as a student athlete, I couldn't imagine it.
No, we had some guys on the team that were biomed majors, and if there was one thing worse than going to the law school, that's it. So it's, I thought about going back afterwards, now being done school, but 5 years, no part of me wants to jump back into it right away. So.
Well, and it seems to have worked out. So, you're spending some time in Kalamazoo, but you finish up at Providence. What prompted that transfer?
Yeah, so loved my time at Western. It was pretty unpredictable. I never really had a year of consistency in terms of play time, and part of that is, again, there's 38 games if you're lucky, kind of thing, per season. It's very, so there's it means there's very small room for error, especially when it comes to rankings and pairwise, and on top of that, we had 4 goalies, so one guy's gonna play, right? So when I had gone to Western, I was kind of told I was going to be the number 3 guy, and had kind of bounced between. It was really strange how it happened, but we had a lot of injuries, and I ended up training camp for us was always, we called them brown and gold games, and so we'd split the team in half, and we do like 10 exhibition games over 2 weeks, and it was all based on numbers. Murray was a big numbers guy, and that would decide your slot in the roster, kind of thing. And so I ended up taking the number 2 job freshman year, and that lasted maybe 3 weeks, and then he went back to his tandem from the year prior. And as a new guy, like I said, I was happy to be there. No complaints. The NCHC is unique, where most of the trips are a flight, not a home-and-home bus trip, and so there's only certain numbers that can travel just for costs. And so it was a nice balance there, because if you obviously wanted to be there every game, travel every road trip, whatever, but if you weren't, it was your opportunity to be a normal college student for a little bit. And so 4 years was kind of a mix. Like, my biggest opportunity was my freshman year towards the end. It's like somehow I was either starting or the number 3 guy and not dressing, but never in between. And then sophomore year had a good start, and like, again, you talk to Gorse, he took over that season, and it was his senior year, and like any guy who's been there and put in work, you hope would run with something at their last opportunity, and that's what he did. And now he's year 5 of pro hockey, right? And so that was phenomenal to be a part of, and to be working so close with him. And then junior year ended up kind of being a mandatory red shirt. It's just kind of how the cards fell for me, and then back at it at senior year. And so it's very tough, because maybe in hindsight I should have considered the transfer earlier. And a lot of guys do, right? But it's such a tough thing to, you're living with the guys, you're in class with the guys, and you get
there's loyalty.
Well, and there's loyalty, but every person that I went to school with at Western Michigan, like, now everybody's getting married, and One falls, they all fall, to say. So there's, but like we were all saying to each other, like that was maybe one of the hardest goodbyes I ever had to do when we had to move out and we were all done, right? But it's
Yeah.
like they'll be at my wedding, I'm at theirs, and that's a tough thing to leave. And also transferring wasn't as prominent as we see now since COVID. But I know guys that have played at 3, 4 schools, which is insane to think about.
Yep.
But yeah, COVID was essentially what prompted that extra little bit of time. It made it really hard for guys to go pro, obviously, and I think we're still seeing congestion there. That's what I mentioned with it being so difficult for goaltenders right now. There's still,
Yeah.
more goaltenders than there are spots, and
Yep.
so Murray had always kind of mentioned the idea of, hey, you do have another year if you wanted it, and I wasn't really considering it. I figured, by the end of my senior year, we'll talk about it. And when that day came, it didn't seem like it was as much on his mind or on the table as it was, even 2 months prior. And so I had kind of decided, okay, now's an opportunity to see elsewhere. And I mentioned like things never really hopped in front of me a whole lot. And so the next couple months, I spent that whole summer still in Kalamazoo. And I had a couple teams message me, but never anything super serious. So again, it was like, well, I did it myself to get to Western, so I'll do it myself again. And I probably emailed 70% of college hockey. Heard back from everybody, but there has to either be a spot open, which there were a few, but there was also like this big congestion in the transfer portal. There was like 200 guys within a matter of days that all jumped on there. Everyone was shuffling around. And the one team I didn't reach out to was Providence, because I had a kid I grew up playing against that went there when I went off to Western, and I know he didn't have a ton of opportunity, and so I kind of left it at that, right? And so
Yeah.
one night I get an email, and by none other than Providence. So the first thing I did was call my buddy, learn a little bit more about his experience, and I'm very big on someone else's experience isn't necessarily yours. And so I knew I needed that extra time. This gave me that extra time, also allows me to further my education. And it ended up being one of the best things I could have done for my career. I absolutely loved that place. It was just so different. I hate getting asked, what do you like better? Because how do you compare somewhere that you kind of grew up, you were there for 4 years, and then somewhere you were there for 8, 9 months kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just too hard to do, but both of them played their parts in my career, right?
Well, in Kalamazoo, the college town, they're famous for their fun.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, no shortage of fun there.
Yeah, you can't compare the two, and it's almost like your senior year, your final year of college, when you need to be a little more serious, was probably, like, no knock on Kalamazoo, but probably better. You got away from that temptation.
Well, and I think that's where I got lucky. I mentioned, right, especially those first 2 years, everybody else, if you weren't traveling, which was most of the freshmen at the time, all the new guys, we had our opportunities. So I kind of got the fun out of the way pretty early on. So when my senior year ended up being my biggest opportunity, I kind of had got it out of my system a little bit, and it was all business from there. So.
Yeah, one of my good friends back, still living in Minnesota, he went there, and yeah, there's stories out of that school that the kids going to Western, they are they're taking school seriously. They know they have a future ahead of them, but they're also enjoying their youth.
Yeah, like I said, time of my life. I know Gorse made a point of calling it Western. I never saw it that way, so I'm not gonna throw any shade at him. But it's all been super valuable, right? It's one of those things too, where as a student athlete, especially when you jump into the workforce, your resume kind of does jump to the top, regardless.
Yeah, from the conversation I had with Trevor, I'll just say I think he lives his life a little different than you and I.
Yeah, that's the easy way to put it. I'll tell you a quick story. He was anybody that plays with him will say the same thing. But there was this. He was a junior when I got to Western, and he had already implemented a word limit on him. He loves to talk.
Yeah, that funny you say it. My high school coach. Again, I'm older than I think most people realize, but going to high school in the 90s, you could do things then you can't do now. And my coach lived 2 blocks away, so he would routinely pick me up for practice, take me to and from practice, sometimes games if mom and dad were both working. And I was a lot like Trevor. I talked a lot. Shocking, I have my own podcast and I talk a lot. And at the one banquet, he says, one of his biggest fears is being trapped in a room with me because he knows I'll never shut up.
No. I think the upperclassmen had a stranglehold on him pretty early. So, I mean, like, again, I poke fun, but he's, as an older guy, like, again, an upperclassman by the time I got there, he's also a resource, right? So, for a guy that loves to talk, it was kind of perfect for me because you eventually, some good pointers come out. And he also wasn't shy to say, hey, maybe try this, and that was what I needed. I'm a big believer in taking bits and pieces from everybody. Every interaction is valuable, right? So there's no right or wrong way. I think that's where a lot of goalies go wrong right now. Is here's the guy I like, and so I'm going to do that.
Well, Trevor kind of giving you pointers. That's what I love about goalie partners is most teams don't have a goalie coach, and those that do, it's becoming more normal. But even at the college level, it's not like you have the goalie coach out there every day working with you. So, but we're out there every day together, and we'll see these things in each other's game, and we'll try and help each other. When I was in college, we had the varsity and JV. Our goalie coach, he was our sports information director, and he also had 2 young kids that were also playing hockey. He was trying to get to their stuff. So, I think maybe once or twice he made it out to a JV practice. So it was really us goalies relying on each other. And then, the varsity goalies, same thing. Even if Donnie was at practice, they were still watching each other because there's 3 goalies, only 2 are in the net at a time. So we're watching each other. And, we would help each other out. There's always those conversations, sometimes during practice, but usually in the locker room afterwards or before practice, trying to show each other, different things, we've been working on. And, I look at the crew that we had because between the 2 teams, we had 6 goalies and, one of them, obviously, I like to say if our talent would have been half as good as our goaltending minds as we had there, we would have been national champions because, like you mentioned, Dave Rogalski, who's in New Jersey, my buddy Ryan S. He runs a pretty darn good goalie school in Minnesota, Debonair goaltending, and some of the other goalies too. Eric Richardson, he won an Illinois high school state championship. Fred Hennon was there my senior year. He went on to be a goalie coach for Benilde St. Margaret in Minnesota and won a girls high school state championship. We had these, a bunch of us had this coaching mentality because we were always working with each other. And some of them turned it into careers.
Well, and you have to, right? Like I mentioned off the hop here, there's that divide between the goaltender and everybody else. And when you get higher levels, you see that divide even between forward and D, right? There's just, and you're 100% right. And we've all, I think, had those goalie partners that are great, good role models. It's easy, it's fun to work with them. And then the other ones where it's like, because you're competing, right? It's your best friend that you're also competing with. So it's a very, very unique position. And I was fortunate with both schools, especially at Western, because we had 4 and every single guy was recruited there to be the guy, right? There was no, he fills in if someone's tired, and so all of us were very, very competitive, but it made us better, I think, at the end of the day. And we all got time when we were there. Some opportunities for some guys were larger than others, and but we don't have all 4 guys get in there and get game time unless they're competing, right, and battling for that spot. And I never ever felt with any of them that there was like, he's hoping that I take one off the collarbone and warm up today, or I think. And it just has 2 perfect examples. Will Massey, he's a goalie coach at Western Michigan right now, he was a goaltender there while Trevor and I were there. And we ended up living together. And when COVID hit, this is something you'll never see between a goaltender or a forward. So it was us two and then 4 forwards on the team that lived with us. And when COVID hit, at the first little bit is no one's going to class and maybe a couple wine nights or whatever, right? And that gets old pretty quick, and you lose the sleep schedule, and you just don't stop not feeling great about yourself. And so me and him were like, we got to get out of this rut. We don't know when we'll be back on the ice. Let's figure something out. And it's the 2 goalies, me and Will. We'd go on runs, and we ended up buying a set of 20 racquetballs and a mini stick glove because it had just the pocket, right? The rest of it was just like a pancake, right? So like the only chance you have at catching it is in that optimal pocket space, which is what we should be doing anyway, right?
Yeah.
And we would spend hours every single day. We'd go on our run and we'd go to the basement. We had this room there, and we'd have lines taped on the ground, and one guy would stand behind, and we'd just hammer the balls at the wall, catch them. And that turned into having a bunch of different stations, a bunch of different things that we did. But you only see that from 2 goaltenders, right?
Yeah.
And so you're 100% right. Like, we're there for each other at the end, and maybe a conversation for another day. But I think the way the goalie coaches and all of that is looked at the NCAA level it's unfortunate in some cases too, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we hate to say it, but it comes down to funding. And you can have a coach that is going to work with, a third, just the defense. You're looking at probably on a given team, 9 guys, or you can have a guy that's going to work with 3 or 4. What's the better investment to them? That's the way they see it. It's not fun to say, but it's the truth. And when you're at a Minnesota or a UMB or North, they have a little more money for their program, but that money drops real quick. Even to a Western Michigan or some of these other schools where they just look at it and they go, well, we can make a few extra bucks on this program, or we can pay a goalie coach. What makes sense? I think there are some schools getting smart about it, like my alma mater, St. Mary's. My buddy S, he goes down there a couple times a year and works with the goalies, and the school is partnering with, Devonair goaltending, not necessarily Ryan, but because it's his alma mater, he's the one going down there working with, because he wants them to do well. But you're starting to maybe see some of these schools partner with goalie schools, so that they might not have that 24/7 approach, but kind of like goaltending coaches in the NHL back in the 80s, where every once in a while they drop in and see what's going on.
Yeah, and I think it needs more attention than that, right? And I'm sure you'd agree, but you're 100% right. It's a money game, and I think Hockey East for NCAA does it well because there's that sponsorship with Stop It Goaltending.
Yeah.
So when I was with Providence, that's where our guy was from, had spent some time there. But again, they were all volunteers, right? Yeah. And so, the long story short here is there's schools that make significantly or have significantly more money for their programs than others. Yep. And so the money's there for some teams and not others. So they had that cap at 3 coaches and some support staff. That's all that they could allocate money to. Yep. And so now some were floating the goalie coach something under the table here and there, whatever. But they were always regarded as a volunteer position. And so in January the beginning of this year, the NCAA added a third or a 4th coaching spot, so a 3rd assistant. And half the schools, like all the goalie coaches, thought the same thing. We're here every single day.
Yeah, we're getting it
in line. And it's been almost like a 50-50 split where some have actually, some have allocated it towards the goalie coach. Some have not done anything and they're trying to decide how to move here. And probably 50% of college hockey has gone, we're going to hire a 3rd assistant who's going to do enhanced scouting, like recruiting for us. Maybe they know a little bit of something about goaltenders, but have kind of eliminated that position. And so that's where I say it's unfortunate, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I could go on about that kind of stuff all day.
Yeah, it's the most important position, but they don't invest in it. I mean, that you hear it all the time on the In Goal podcast. They say the same thing. How are programs not investing in goaltending if a team doesn't win a championship, they always blame it on the goaltending. Well, then let's bring in the resources to fix that. And you mentioned stop at goaltending, and one of the things, they're, I don't want to say famous for, but really pushes that Sense Arena. And so I got to imagine at Providence, you were probably using that. How did that help your game? What'd you think of it?
So I never actually, we didn't have it when I was there.
Okay.
My goalie partner is Jackson Stauber. So he's with the Chicago Blackhawks
Yeah.
playing in the AHL for them. So I mentioned, right, having certain goalie partners that were just phenomenal, and he was one of them. And when I stepped in, it was a much more significant role for me at Providence than it was at Western, and I could tell I was in the conversation more. But there's this guy Jackson Stauber who lives. If you think you work hard, wait till you meet this big guy.
Well, I mean, let's look at Jackson. His dad was no slouch of a goalie, Hobie Baker winner. He played the NHL, but then they have Stauber goaltending in Minnesota, where he had his own ice, literally, to sit there and practice whenever he wanted.
And that's where I was going with it. So his dad bought him the Sense Arena for Christmas that year, and so I never got to play around with it, but that was the first introduction to it. Now, where I coach here in Ottawa, we've just brought that in as well. So it's new. We're still trying to figure it out, but that's one of those things, right? Like, goaltending is so complex, but at the end of the day, what's the job? Stop the puck. And I think we lose that sometimes by overcomplicating, whether we're throwing too much science or everybody wants to have their own tools. And that's kind of my initial thought with something like Sense Arena. I've definitely changed my mind here. And you have to, when every pro team, now schools have it, there's value there when it's become so popular, right? And so again, I'm a big believer in goaltending is very easy to complicate. I think we move backwards a little bit when we do that, but there's useful tools, and then there's some that I just think are ridiculous.
I've done the free trial because I'm a cheap SOB, and B, I can't justify that expense for beer league hockey. And I work a full-time job. I have kids, so I'm like, how often would I really be using it? But I will say, if I used it before a game, because in the beer leagues you get horrible warm-ups anyway, it is pretty much just all your hands. You're not going down into the butterfly, but just getting up to speed with watching that puck. And as a goalie, I mean, forwards can go out into the driveway and shoot pucks. They have their pass bars and everything else. There's things they can do, but we can't practice on our own. But now at Sense Arena, there's something we can do on our own if nobody's around to shoot on us, And you can watch that puck into the gloves, and even some of the drills where it's just watching the puck move around. I think there's value there. I think some people might overhype it at times, but no, I like it. And the 7 days I got to try it out for free, I definitely noticed an improvement in my game before I went to the rink. Those few times. I like it. I wish I could use it more, especially before my games, but it is what it is.
I think there's two parts to my game that I neglected, I think, for too long. And by the time I realized how important they were, I feel like maybe it was too late.
Yeah.
And one is, understanding that your brain's a muscle, right? Working on the mental side of things, because, what's the statistic, or what's the saying, 80% mental, 20, and at the end of the day, I don't think something like, I'm 6'4", so size wasn't the issue for me. I like to think I was athletic, but all the times where it's like, maybe I went wrong or I didn't play my best, it was always something between the ears, I think. So I kind of neglected that for a long time. And the other thing is just like your hand-eye, right? It's easy to stretch or just like every goalie juggles or whatever, but I'm a big believer in doing things with a purpose. And so this was before Sense Arena, but my way around that and the tools that were useful to me were I ordered this thing from Latvia, and it was kind of like a bungee that you would like zip tie to your waist kind of thing. And on the end of it was like a lacrosse ball that had dots on it, right? Little
okay,
So that was like usually how I'd end things off. But it's super easy. You throw it, it comes back at you even faster, and it goes from tracking the ball in to zoning in on individual dots, right? Just like as the
Yeah.
puck, we're like, it's easy, not easy, but the idea of watching the puck is simple, but to really dial in, to really zone in, is just watching that top surface area, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing was, I got these. If you've ever watched the series F1, I'm sure.
I haven't watched it yet. No.
Okay. Well, you're behind. You'll see. There's a lot of transferables between these guys and somebody like a goaltender. There's one goalie in the net, one guy in the car. They've got a partner that they're competing with. We've got a partner we're competing with. But a lot of the reaction time, the different tools they had. So I got these things. They suction cup to the wall, and they're not motion sensor, but they light up until you wave your hand in front of them or you hit them.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, and the app for it was very customizable, and so I was able to build in a routine that I would do before every practice, every game, and that was my sense arena. How I found made the biggest difference was, there's the reaction time of every time one flashes, you got to hit it, and then it gives you the feedback of, here's how quick you were between hits or whatever, and then you can do where you have two colors, but one is good and one's bad, and you have 3 strikes if you hit the bat. And it's like a ton of different stuff that I found really helped, but it's all useful tools, right? Doing something with a purpose, and instead of I'm going to juggle for 10 minutes because like that's what everybody else does, and then I'll hop on the ice, and I'll just be good to go.
Yeah, I never juggled because I couldn't. As much as I tried, I just couldn't figure it out. But there's all, like you said, there's all these tools. Some of them are going to be right for one goalie, and they're not going to be right for another. It's just like certain save selections are right for some goalies and aren't for others. And I think that's where goalie coaches are. You can tell the good ones from the bad ones, because some goalie coaches coach to the goalie, and other goalie coaches coach to the system. And you got to coach to the goalie because everybody's different.
Well, and like we've said over and over, right? Like I think the underlying theme here is who do we have? We're on our island there. We're the outlier, if anything. And so I've always described being a goalie coach as kind of a buddy, right? They're not there. I've never had a goalie coach yell and scream at me. I've had guys where I disagree, and we have a discussion, but it's the one other person other than your partner who understands. And like I said, any coach, any head coach, any assistant that you've ever had, the most common phrase I've ever heard and everywhere that I've gone has been, look, I don't know anything about goalies, so I leave all of that stuff to this guy, right? And then it's ironic because they make all the decisions. Right? And then they make all the decisions anyway, regardless of what the goalie coach says sometimes, right?
Yeah.
It really is a buddy. Like they're not there to yell and scream, but to help everybody build their own game.
When you're a goalie coach, you're part therapist.
Oh, almost full-time therapist.
It's kind of fun though when you have those goalies and you start to learn the personalities, because you have to treat them all different. And the goalies I had were like one of the recent ones I had on the podcast. I could just look at him from the bench and be like, "What the hell were you thinking?" And he's like, I know that was a stupid move. Or, I could almost pick on him and say things I could never say to other goalies, because it's like, I knew the way his brain worked. I knew that that's what connected with him. But then there were others, like you almost have to put your arm around and be like, hey, it's okay. It wasn't your fault. You did your best there. And but this other one, I could just be like, get your head out of your backside. Stop doing stupid stuff like that. And they're like, I know.
Well, and I think, like, again, it very rarely is there a goalie that just hasn't had to go through adversity. There's always something somewhere along the way. And I think it's easy, especially when you're new to juniors or it's your first time, to think, why is it so much harder for me than everybody else? And I remember thinking that myself. And so that's a big commonality I've learned now, even just with a lot of my clients. I had one of our guys who's playing juniors out east that I was talking to last week. Walk on to the QMJHL, signed as a free agent, very, very difficult to do, and then has bounced through 3 teams now. He's not in the league that he wants to be in and whatever. And so I had a good chat with him last weekend. And I think it just helps you feel better and understand,
Mm-hmm.
again, the whole idea of controllables, what can you control, what can you not control. And he was telling me that some of the feedback he got from coach, because you get to a point sometimes where you got to go in and storm the castle, right? And that can either you know be constructive or detrimental depending on the personality type of the coach.
Yep.
The feedback he got from where he was, I need to see you like work harder, work out more, eat better. And so I was telling this kid, right? So what do you think he goes and does? He's eating better. He's working hard. And I said, hey, when you're at the gym, is coach working out with you? And he's like, no. Okay, well, when you eat dinner, is coach, like you live with coach? No. So exactly. Sometimes they just have to say something, but you
Yep.
just kind of have to talk it out and hash it out and understand that, like, no shade towards coaches. That's one of the toughest positions to be in, right? How can you care about people but have to make tough decisions? It's
Yeah.
maintaining that kind of that optimal, like that balance between friend and the bad guy is a very, very difficult thing to do. But it's what I was saying to this player, right? So I think the underlying thing here is, sometimes they have to say something, but we
Mm-hmm.
need to know when to kind of brush it off and when to take it seriously. And I think having those conversations is just so important. The next night he goes out and stops 41 of 43 for, a good bounce back win. And, but understanding that other people have been through stuff too. And it's not just you, like almost every goalie that you know or played with or against has been through something, or that's the story about this coach or this bad game, right? And I
Yep.
think you're right. That's where it really does become some therapy. Understanding you're not alone on the island there, even though it feels like it.
Yeah, I forget which coach it was of mine, but I was in a little bit of a rut, and he's like, he threw out some stats. He's like, Patrick Waz let in X number of goals last year. He lost this many games. It's
Yeah.
just, we've all had bad days. We've all had bad games. It's going to happen, and it's how you respond. I know, it's been mentioned many times. Mitch Korn, he likes to see goalies have bad games, see how they bounce
Yeah.
back. That's how he likes to really evaluate a goalie, because the way you bounce back is almost more important than anything else.
I love Mitch. He's obviously, anybody who's followed hockey would know, and as a goaltender would know that name, right? And
Yep.
so one of my guys was at camp with the Islanders this year, and based on the number of contracts they had, we knew he wasn't going to stick
Yep.
there, even in Bridgeport. And Mitch still texts him every week, and he doesn't have to do that. This guy has worked with some of the best, and he's got,
Yeah.
not to mention current guys, in the league that he's like, that's your investment. That's where your time should be. And for somebody like that to go out of their way for someone trying to make it, right, just to say, hey, like, how are things going? It means a lot. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to say there's a ton of guys quality like that in the game, but you sure can pick them out when you see them, right? And they
Yeah.
definitely make a difference.
Mitch has time for goalies. That's what I'll say. And it's funny because I've reached out to him to get him on the podcast. He's like, I work for Lou Lamoriello. I
Yeah.
can't talk. It's like,
Yeah.
I kind of figured, but I had to ask anyway, right? But it's like,
Yeah.
I know if there was that, there's going to be a time where Lou's between jobs, and I can quick hop on and get him on, and he'll be on, the next day if it fits his schedule, because that's just the way he is.
Yeah, I unfortunately don't know if that'll happen until maybe Mitch goes to another team.
Yeah.
Lou's son is Bridgeport, right? So that's like the Lamoriello show for a long time here.
Yeah, Mitch and Lou are their package deal, and I think
Yeah.
everybody knows that.
Exactly.
So, like you said, the only time we'll have him on is if Lou is between jobs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he won't have that restriction.
No, yeah, that'd be a good one though. I think, we'll cross our fingers for that one, because I think that'll have to be one of the best, right? So
Yeah. I don't know that my last recording with Grant was pretty darn good too. It's
yeah,
not every day I get somebody that's got his name on the cup 5 times to talk goaltending too.
Yeah.
But hey, I want to be mindful of time. If you've listened to Trevor's episode, I like to end every episode with 10 questions. I used to call them rapid fire, but they really aren't rapid fire because that's where some of the best stories come out of. And the first one is, what's the craziest coaching moment from your playing days where a coach just lost it?
I haven't played for a ton of guys that were known to do that. I've had some coaches that have all had their moments for sure, but nobody really has gone crazy. Again, I think it's one of the hardest positions. Something that comes to mind is my first year juniors. This isn't an example of a coach losing it, but it was like for me kind of like a what's going on here. We had my junior coach, my first year in the OJ. I hadn't played a game yet. Our starter was an overager, and I knew they wanted to get him into school somewhere and give him his opportunity, which as a young guy you respect. And again, like my situation with Trevor, you learn a ton, right? And so for whatever reason, like coach that year had something with me. And every trip when we were pulling into the parking lot for the rink, he would go up and down the aisle, fist bump everybody, say like try and get them fired up. And except for me, it was consistently every single game that entire year. He would turn his back, and I'd be the only guy who would. And it's like at first it was like, well, like because I'm not starting, so like he's just know. And then games I was starting, and so it kind of just became like, all right, there's something going on here. That was an interesting one. I've got a quick funny one about Murray. With a guy like him who's so routine and so just dialed into details, you start to get to know his tendencies pretty well. And one of them was he'd walk into the locker room and he'll pace around a little bit. And I don't know if he's just building the tension or what, but everyone's just kind of like, especially if we're losing, we know it's not going to be a good chat. You just kind of, we're on edge and you're trying to just sit up straight, not give him any excuse because he wasn't afraid to call guys out. But we had these two trash cans underneath the TV at the front of the locker room, and he would walk around and pick up the tape on the ground when guys are changing the sock tape, stick tape, and throw them in the garbage, and then he'd close the bin. And so there's one game we're absolutely getting blown out after the second period. I don't know what the score was, but it was not good. And we had a couple of jokesters on the team, and so Murray comes in, and we all just stop what we're doing, and he walks around, picks up a couple tape balls, puts them in the trash, closes the lid, and then instead of starting his speech like normal, he just walks out of the locker room. And so all of us are looking at each other like, all right, I guess things are that bad that just no speech. And one of the guys, like, we laugh because like we should be dialed in, we should be taking it seriously. It's college hockey, but like I mentioned, we had a couple of jokesters, and one of them got up, went to the trash can, opened up the lid, took out all the tape balls that Murray had put in, and put them back on the floor where he had picked them up, and then went and sat back down. So Murray comes in 30 seconds later. Now he figured out what he wanted to say, and we saw him kind of like stutter step and look at the ground where all the tape was. And like you're losing by 3 or 4, the game's out of hand. The guy like Murray scares everybody, and you're trying not to laugh, and it's supposed to be serious. It was that was a funny one for
sure. So what is your favorite all-time goalie mask?
Patrick Lalime with Ottawa Senators.
Okay, with the Marvin the Martian.
Yeah, so he was probably my first influence, and that was, again, like I said, I woke up, wanted to play hockey. Ottawa has a team, start watching it on TV with Dad after however many years of, no, I won't do it. And he happens to be the goalie with Ottawa. Don't know anything about him, but his stuff looks cool, and that's just kind of how it starts, right? So I remember the Marvin the Martian mask. He had carried the same mask when he went to Buffalo, just changed up the colors. But Ottawa was selling sticks, Sherwood sticks, that were painted Marvin the Martian, just like what he had. And so my first stick ever was a Patrick Lalime Marvin the Martian youth hockey goal stick. And my dad bought 5 of them, whatever, just so we had stock because he knew how much of a fan I was. And so I have my first goal stick I ever used, still with the tape on it. My parents had mounted it in my room at their place, my childhood bedroom, cool. And it's signed by the Sens mascot. It's it's pretty special. So I got to say his for sure.
Yeah, and I remember that mask. It worked so well, and everywhere he went, even in Chicago, I remember he still had it on there at the end of his career, and it was just why Marvin the Martian, I have no idea, but it worked for him. Because when he came in, he had
personality,
that.
right?
Yeah, he originally had that Penguin one in Pittsburgh, which was cool, where the Penguin was coming out. But yeah, he had some cool stuff, and he had those Sherwood pads too that had like the W on there. He had style.
And I'm not a big super flashy guy, like always respect for Fleury and coming into the league and going bright yellow, you know.
Yeah.
But I've always been like simple. I don't want to stand out. I want to just, you know, be solid, look solid. And but I guess another great thing about being a goaltender, it's an expression of personality without even having to say anything, right? And I think there's a lot of creative things we could do, and we see a lot of goalies now, like Markstrom. There's so much detail. I'm not a big skull, you know, crossbone on that kind of guy, but like there's so much detail in his helmets and in his masks. It's unbelievable. And then there's other guys that like you can tell they're not the artistic type, and they go through, well, I get 3 masks a year or whatever, and so just do what you want, and it's a lot more simple, and you know, so it's cool to see what guys come up with.
Markstrom has such awesome masks, and I love that his mask painter like puts out amazing videos of the whole process.
Yeah,
so you
that's how I got onto it.
The detail, but then you have a guy like Crow who had a very simple, I would say, classic mask, and he wouldn't change it from year to year. And I loved that about him because it was kind of like the old school goalies of the 80s and the 90s, where it's like some of these goalies had the same stuff, you know, masks. Martin Brodeur, same thing. Even when he went to St. Louis, kept that same style.
Don't break what works. I kept the back plate for every single one of my helmets. I kept the back plate for 5 years, 2 schools. I kept it the exact same. It had everything that meant to me, and then the rest of it, I told her. I was lucky both schools didn't have much restriction on what could be on there. A lot of schools, it's tough for the artists because the logos have to be certain logos or certain size, you know. And so again, I'm not the artist, so as long as I had the back plate, I had everything that was important. I kind of just said it's probably more fun for you guys to just figure it out, come up with something, and then they were like, yeah, it is a lot more fun. So every year, that was my only feedback.
Yeah, my college mask, I went simple. We were the Cardinals, and we had this really cool hockey playing Cardinal, so I just had it on both sides, you know, with the face off at the, you know, at the chin. It was like just simple. And even my coach, he's like, it's just so simple, but like it works. But it was kind of a nod to those goalie masks of the 90s where it's just, you know, simplicity. I like the simple, you know, where you can almost from the stands tell what it is, you know, and there's something to, you know, I'll call them the Dave Art ones where you got to be right up on top of them and see all the detail. There's still something cool about them too. I love goalie mask art. It's so cool. And when I was in high school in art class, every single project I made sure to do a different goalie mask in the style that was. And my teacher was getting so upset. And she's like, "Why do you always do it?" It's like, well, look at these different masks. They're all a work of art. You know, I got my teacher to come around to like, yeah, you're right. She's like, as long as you're following, you know, the instructions. Like one time we had to do like a mosaic thing, and I forget whose I did. Another time it was just color pencils, so I did Beezers. Another time it had to be a, you know, be a picture, but there had to be a maze in there somewhere. So I actually took Jeff Hackett's Blackhawks mask, which I think is severely underrated with that headdress, just beautifully done. And she's every time she's like, son of a bitch, I tried doing some kind of deal so that didn't think you'd be able to do it, but every time I was able to come up with a reason to have a goalie mask.
It's a perfect example, right, of someone who just doesn't understand. If you ask my parents, I'm sure there was every single year throughout grade school, there was some teacher complained about how all my work had something to do with goaltending or hockey, and the whole, hey, you should probably try some other things, you know. And I'm just like, I didn't want to hear it at the time. So
one of my buddies from high school who I've kept in touch with, he just would refer to me as hockey, because apparently that's all I ever talked about, which is probably true. So what's your favorite rink that you've played at?
Again, there's some bias here as a former college player. I think that, the facilities are, second to none and better than what we see in NFL sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I've played in some college locker rooms that were better than what some NHL teams get to run with, and certainly when I was in the coast for a little bit. You know, and I'm sure Trevor said the same. Lawson is a very, very special place, but it's less
Mm-hmm.
about the building. It's very tiny. It's kind of old.
Yep.
But none of that matters when you've got the Lawson Lunatics in there. And, I've played in a lot of different places. I've played in some cool rinks. North Dakota is obviously a really special one. That is
Yeah.
essentially an NHL barn. And
Yeah.
Jumbotron that goes from blue line to blue line, it's massive. But I think I got to stick with Lawson.
Yeah.
The game that I remember the most was my freshman year. We're playing Denver, back-to-back games at home, and they had just come off their national championship win, 14 games unbeaten, whatever it was, and we're down 4-2. I get put in, and we end up coming back to win 6-5. And for my first college game, especially when you get thrown in and you're down against these guys, if this is probably going to go downhill pretty quick.
Yeah. You're on mop-up duty.
Yeah, exactly right. But no pressure on myself at that point. But
Yep.
to come back and win, and everybody knew the stakes. I remember like 30 seconds left, the puck's in the other end, and I kind of do the whole elbows on knees, look down. I'm looking between my legs, and my vision was shaking. It was so loud in that building. And if you know Lawson and you know the Lunatics, most arenas, most rinks will have their student section behind the away net.
Yeah.
And it's just that section, that corner of the building, and some there's a couple rows, some it's pretty substantial, right? Obviously the children of Yost or whatever for University of Michigan, they've got a good one and they're pretty ruthless, but the Lunatics cover like end to end half of the rink, and they're on their feet the entire time. They do not sit down. We always knew when our parents and everybody came to visit where their section was, because it was the only section not covered by students. We don't
Only
throw
one
them into
sitting.
that mess. But yeah, exactly. But it is unbelievable. They rally around you. It's funny because they swarm the penalty box, so they're yelling absurdities. And not only that, they have their famous chants, from years. It's just a tradition now. And to see how all that gets passed from class to class that comes through there, stuff that started, 10, 15, 20 years ago, I'm sure. It just shows you the dedication and how much people love hockey there, and really rally around it. So in my mind, the saying is, you'll never forget, you'll never ever be prepared for your first game in front of the Lunatics, because you step out there and you forget how to skate instantly. It's
at
insane.
Western, it's a big school but small school at the same time, and hockey is really the game on campus. They have the football team that does well, but they play once a week. But even if you go to the University of Minnesota, now granted, all of their other sports don't do very well, but they're still a Big Ten school. It's one of those schools where hockey's the big team on campus, which makes it even better.
If you ask football, I'm sure they'd say otherwise. There was our share of battles with them, but I mean, there's also 300 guys per roster on the football team.
Yeah,
no,
they've had a few good years, but ever since PJ left and went to Minnesota, and I think he's losing his luster there. If you ask me, I mean, the football program has its peaks every couple decades.
And so he left the year before I came in, so I've never been there where they were super strong, and we also didn't have a ton of opportunity to go to their games or tailgates. I think that's the other thing, especially for people that don't know hockey. We're one of the longest seasons of any sport because we're there the entire year, right? Or soccer, or gymnastics, or whatever. We'll have a spring and a fall season, and and we're just going all the time. And so I think you're right. And you could tell too, like, again, I remember playing that first game and then going to class, and I've maybe been on campus for a month and a half, 2 months, and I'm walking into class and people are coming up to shake my hand, and I had played half of a hockey game.
Yeah.
That just happened to be one of the biggest games on campus, and all of a sudden people know you. Not to mention the guys that were draft picks, because they were their own rock stars, and where you're just kind of happy to be friends with them, But it really is great, and again, I think that's the kind of thing that just separates college hockey away from juniors, away from just like even going to school in Canada. Like I'll never say that I'll push my kids into hockey, but if they jump into that and they can go to the U.S., I'd recommend it. It's such a special time.
Yeah, my kids are teenagers now, and I'm not gonna lie and say, I wouldn't have minded them playing hockey, but my daughter, she's an artist. She tried basketball, she tried volleyball, and that kind of stuff. But my son's a baseball player. He had the opportunity to play. He would skate on the ponds. We had the backyard rink for a while there. And we asked him, "Do you want to play?" "No, I really don't like hockey, parents," he would say. And it's like, all right, we get that. And then, as he got older, all your buddies play. You sure you don't want to play? And he's like, they skate 7-8 times a week. He goes, they're practicing at 9:30. I go to bed at 9:30. And I was like,
yeah,
all right, dude. But he's more, he loves baseball. Hopefully he makes the team now that we moved down to Georgia this year, but he's more of an academic. He wants to be an aerospace engineer. He wants to go and be a smart kid. And it's like, all right, that's his path to lead. Mine, I loved hockey. That helped lead me to the college I went to, and it worked out because I got a great education. And I met my wife. So
yeah, no, and I feel like quick, right? It's not something you like to do. The passion's there, or it's not.
Yeah, exactly. And he likes watching the games with me. And my daughter, she was just a little one when the Blackhawks were winning the Stanley Cups, and she would get up from after I put her to bed and still come downstairs, and she'd sit right here and watch the games with me. And Joe Quenneville had the habit of yelling peanut butter when things were going good. Nobody really understood why, but they would score, she would celebrate and scream peanut butter. So now that they got Bedard, I know I'll walk into her room and she's got ESPN on watching Blackhawk games, and she'll be like, hey, in the morning, Dad, Connor got another goal last night. So it's like, they still enjoy watching the games with me, but do they play? No, but who cares,
Yeah, no, exactly. It's good.
It's their path. So the next question, I think I know the answer based on our conversation already, but I'm still going to ask it. What's your favorite stick that you've ever used?
Favorite stick?
Yeah.
Reebok 20K, I think it was called. It was, if you remember, when Carey Price first came into the league and he had switched over to Reebok, and he was using that stick where, it had the air painted white paddle with, Montreal colored lines on it, but the shaft was that typical wood. So I had a couple pro returns. I think it was the 20K. I can't remember, 11K. I don't know. It's been a long time, but I was always a wood stick guy, and I think those were some of those when foam core became really, really
really still got
big.
one of those I'm using.
Yeah. Well, and was that a Warrior?
Yeah, it's a Connor Delia pro return, because he was still using them. Which I love it.
Well, and those were my favorite, the Warrior, but foam cores. But like when I'm 15, 16-year-old breaking a stick every couple games, like mom and dad are not happy with me.
No.
And I couldn't deal with the composite sticks because they would, I felt like if I'd go down, just paddle down on a dump in, they would rocket off the paddle. And so I liked something heavier. I wanted to feel the puck, not just, have a feather.
Same.
And when I went to college and our sponsor was Bauer, so their headquarters is in Blainville, so close to Montreal, which is a couple hours from me. So I drove out. They gave me a private tour. I got to try everything, and I knew that they kind of said, here's what they had the sticks planned out for the next X amount of years, and they were like, and none of them were wood, none of them were. So I transitioned to the Vapor 1X, and then they phased everybody out of those, and it's all about the lightest thing ever. And so by the time
Yeah.
I finished, I finally made that switch, and I was using 2S's, but I don't even know what they're at now. But yeah,
Yeah.
the foam core, like a good pro stock foam core, where it didn't break. It
Yep.
was heavy enough, that was ideal for me.
Yeah. I still haven't gone composite because I can't stomach paying that much for a stick. And I like the heavier stick, and I think the composites for the most part are just too light. I feel like I would never have my blade on the ice because I'd be like, well, I don't know. I need a little bit of that heavier stick, but I like this Delia because it had the trigger grip, and I wanted to try it.
Yeah.
And I can never go back now. I love the trigger grip.
That's what I hear. I never switched any of that up because I knew that I had a tough enough time getting myself, especially when you have 4 or 5 sticks in your rotation,
Yeah.
to tape them all. And I'm not throwing those to the equipment manager and say, hey, shave them down for me.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I
I'll grab it. It came with the trigger grip. Oh,
yeah.
jeez, I'm making all kinds of noise here, but it came with the trigger grip on there, so it's
Yeah.
just factory like that. But I like it because now if I buy another stick that doesn't have the trigger grip, I can just clamp this right on top of it, take the router with the flush bit, and boom, there we go.
Yeah.
You're on out.
Do it DIY project.
Yeah, because I was scared to do it myself, or I didn't want to mess it up. But now that I got a good template that I can use for it, and my pads that I have are red, white, and black, and this is from when he left Chicago. I was like, well, it fits perfectly. Matches everything perfectly. So the next question: what's your favorite youth hockey memory?
I think any of the tournaments we did, especially growing up in Canada, the big ones were always in Toronto. We never really went south for a whole lot of them. And so I have specific memories and even just certain songs that I hear. And it's almost weird to listen to now because it was on the rotation for every trip with Dad, right? And so I think like I said, February will be a year out from playing for me. I still think it's kind of soon. There's certain songs I can't listen to, and just because it reminds you of a time where you don't realize how easy it was until you're not playing anymore. But those road trips there's always memories, always stories that come up when I'm on the phone with Dad or when I visit him, and it's unbelievably special. I think in terms of performance, my last year of minor hockey, I mentioned everything is just super last minute for me, and I knew it would take me that much longer. It was the only year of AAA I ever played was my senior year in high school, and so that's the first year where they kind of combine age groups for us, and so we had a strong team, and going into playoffs, our coach's rule was whichever goalie has the shutout is going to get the next game. And so the other guy played more than I did, but we ended up winning our league and going to provincials in Toronto, and it just completely flipped. And I don't know what happened for me, but that was such a special week. That was where my first interest from the OHL came from. I talked to the Frontenacs and I just flipped the switch that weekend. I played the first game. We were ranked last of the 6 teams that were there, with a team from Toronto being first. They had 30 games unbeaten, win it every year kind of thing. And you're dealing with the Toronto Marlies and all those teams, right, that are good every year. And I ended up being the guy I think I played 4.5 out of the 6 games, shut out the first place team in the country. We were their first loss in 40 some games at that point, to beat them 2-0. Player of the game, and just, it's unexpected. You have a good team, and then when you get thrown into a pool of other teams that are all thinking the same thing, this is our year, and then to go that far. And we ended up losing in the final to not go to TELUS Cup, but we went farther than we had thought, and it was just right place, right time. A lot of guys signed after that. That was needed to happen for me to get to juniors. Otherwise, I don't know if I was on anyone's radar, but it was the best hockey I've probably played to this day. And I say that not just based on performance, but as a goaltender, you know what it's like to be out there, and I'm on. I feel good.
Yeah,
right? And we
you
never
go
know
on those runs.
why. Right.
Yeah,
And we never know why. We never like, and that's where like, I think the idea of routine versus ritual is important, because that's when, superstition takes hold, because you want to keep this run going, and it can end up hurting us. But it was the most, like, I don't know that there's been many games since where, and it's been a long time, where I've walked in and gone like, these guys are going to have to beat me today because I feel
yeah,
good. And it's such a special feeling, and you can't recreate it.
yeah.
Right. And again, there's certain songs that just remind me of like, this is what I listened to before those games.
Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned that. There's just those stretches we go in, and for whatever reason, like the end of January through like March is when I play my best hockey. Never fails, and it started back in high school because that was playoff time, and it was just like a switch would flip, and it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, if they beat us, it's not because of me today. One of those mentalities. And my teammates even noticed it. And then, in college, they said I had the fastest score in the MIAC for 4 years, but I was still playing good in practice at that point. But even in the beer leagues now, it's like mid-January comes around and just something happens where, but yeah, in
Yeah.
those songs, I'll never forget it. Just played my last high school game. I got my headphones on, hooked up to the Walkman because again, I'm old. On the way home, and I just have Green Day, "Time of My Life" on repeat the whole way home. So it's like
Yeah.
every time that song goes on, it just takes me right back to that last game. But all of a sudden, my dad goes, "You ready?" And he just turns up the stereo, and the Beach Boys, "Sloop John B" was on, and I don't think I'd really ever heard that song before, but for some reason, both of us just sang along to that song in the car for
Yeah.
whatever. So it's like every time I think of that song, it just makes me smile. There's those songs that bring you back to certain points.
It was a lot of Nickelback for us, as you can imagine, whether
That's
you
so
like it or not.
cliche.
But I know, but it's funny because it's not only a special memory for yourself, right? But like again, so it's for my dad too,
Yeah,
and the bond that we'll have that other members of the family not necessarily, but those same songs will come on, and I might not say anything, but I'm like, this reminds me of this tournament, and my dad
yeah,
will go, hey, this reminds me of when we drove to Trenton or to Kingston for this tournament, and it was
yeah.
exactly how I see it too, right? And that's such a special thing.
Yeah, and me now having lost a parent, I'll say those songs become even more special as you
I
grow
know,
older
yeah,
for those reasons. It's, I remember asking my dad, I'm like, what the hell was that all about? He's like, I don't know, but I still remember that too. And it's like every time
yeah,
that song comes on, it just makes us smile. So,
yeah.
the next question: what's the best chirp you've heard on the ice, off the ice, directed at you, not directed at you, or even from you to another player?
Well, it definitely wasn't for me to another player, because if it was a day you're not feeling great, you're not the one chirping. But I can admit to being terrible at it. I One thing that I always laughed at though was in games where I wasn't starting, if I'm on the bench or whatever, and especially at rinks where the bench is side by side, and somebody starts trying to chirp me from the ice or yell at me.
Yeah,
Um, I remember we were playing St. Cloud and at home at Lawson, and I was leaning over the boards. Puck was in our end. One of their players was back checking and just purposely, like, there's no way it was an accident, sideswipes me, like tries to take my head off, and I'm not anywhere involved in the game.
yeah,
And he comes off the ice, and I looked at him like expecting an apology, like, hey, my bad. And we just start going at it. And I kind of like, I looked at him and I was like, why was I the target? Like, I am the most irrelevant player in this game right now. Why was I who you decided to, like, you kind of have to laugh, because it's like,
yeah,
it shows how frustrated you are that let's go after the backup.
yeah,
So um that was we ended up, it was the next period again, we're on the bench, and he's like, hey, that was super uncalled for. And I'm not a huge grudge guy. Like, you understand the heat of the
yeah,
battle, the heat of the moment sometimes, but I just always loved when somebody tried to come after me, especially if I wasn't playing. When you're playing and you're in that zone, it's pretty easy to just shut the wall and ignore it. And
yeah,
that you're in their head, coincidentally, if they're trying to get you off your game, is
yeah.
how I thought of that. But if I wasn't playing and someone was trying to chirp me, it was just like why am I the target here? You guys go after somebody else. This makes zero sense. But whatever gets you through it, I guess.
They're always fun though. In fact, my last game, I got into it with the guy. We're losing 8-3. This guy's got 5 of their goals. 3 minutes left in the game. I clearly have the puck covered for, the ref's just slow, and he hacks at my glove. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? We had words, and even the ref chuckled at a few of the things I said. And he's like, all right, fellas, all right. But, we're shaking hands afterwards, and he's like, I'm sorry, because his excuse was, I haven't heard a whistle yet. And it's like, you've got 5 goals. You're up 8-3. Do you, and after the game, he's like, that he didn't even apologize. He's like, I'm sorry, I was just going to the whistle. I said, I don't care. It's beer league, dude. Like whether it's a close game or not, when the goalie's got it covered, stop hacking away. It's like, and he had 5 goals already. And I said to him, I said, the Live Barn scouts aren't watching a 10 o'clock game from Atlanta, so get over it. And he didn't appreciate that one.
I like this was one that sometimes you run into guys and they too cocky or whatever, whether they're a top player or not. But I've heard guys say, like, Google me, like, look me up.
Yeah.
And I love that one, like, in a sarcastic way, where, like, I didn't play 100 NHL games, I didn't play 100 college games. So some of my friends would start to say it knowing, like, full on it was a joke. But I just think it's a funny one to throw out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always fun, and 9 out of 10 times when you're chirping a guy on the ice, they get it. It's all in good humor.
When you leave the ice, it's gone, right?
Yeah.
Or it should be, and if it's not, you have bigger problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell the guys, like, we all got to work in the morning. This is just a nice little escape for us each, once or twice a week. And my team back in Minnesota, we had the motto is, if nobody gets hurt and there's cold beer in the locker room, it doesn't matter what the scoreboard says, it's a victory. Yeah.
No, exactly right. Something to look forward to.
Yeah. So what is the worst post-game beverage?
There's no beer. That's probably not great. I'm sure I'm not the first one to say that.
Yeah. I was going to say, normally that's what's the worst post-game beer, but you most recently played college hockey, and I know the NCAA isn't keen on that one, but it is what it is.
We did have like protein shakes, like we had milk, and for me, like, I understand recovery and all of that, but like the last thing I want to slug as soon as I come off the ice is milk. Just make me feel even worse than I already do. So that definitely isn't fun.
Might as well give me a glass of cement.
No, exactly right. Or let's just put some chalk in a cup, and that's so that was probably, in terms of beer though, it was a big college joke, especially as a Canadian. When you get to the U.S. and it doesn't cost you an arm and a leg like it does in Canada for a case of beer, right? And so a lot of us, one of my fellow Canadians, we were just like shocked. We're trying to budget going out on a weekend, and then we're like, we don't have to do that. And so I remember he was just like, got really sucked into how cheap it could be, and ended up buying a case of hams. And like, as a college student, you kind of just drink what you can get your hand, like you haven't developed that. I prefer this. But that was, we still make fun of them to this day. It's been 7 or 8 years now since freshman year. And when we had to, well, I'll say it this way, we cut up that case and we put it in a frame and hung it up on the wall as like a, let's not do that one again. So that would probably be the worst.
I had teammates who would drink Schlitz because they could get a 30-pack for $3.99.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so moving on. When you tape your stick, do you go heel to toe or toe to heel?
Heel to toe.
Okay, you're in the majority.
Yeah, I don't know why. There was no reason. I mean, I wasn't super picky about a lot of my stuff. When I was a kid, I'm sure I did some crazy, either different tape patterns or, here and there like everybody, but I wasn't very, you know, superstitious. I felt like I don't understand goalies that don't have tape on the heel of their stick, because that was always like, if you think about deflecting pucks, and um, that's the optimal spot to hit it on your stick, right?
Well,
To really just get it to pop. And so all of mine would get destroyed on the heel, and so that's like the
in
first place for me.
knowing you use wooden sticks too, I mean, that's why I still tape up the heel, is because wooden
Yeah,
sticks, that was a weak point, the stick. So you would tape
exactly.
it there for that purpose. But I think some of these younger kids, they've only ever used composites, and that hasn't been an issue for them. So I've seen some kids not even use tape. So
No, yeah, and it's funny. I had a goalie partner. He was my senior year. I'm not proud of it, but he's retaping a stick between practice, and those guys you played with that, like, you can poke fun at each other and it's all
yeah,
good. Some guys handle it better, and so he
yeah,
was retaping his stick, and there were certain days of practice where we knew we were doing goalie touches, like breakout passes, and like it
yeah.
was a lot of in and out of the net. And we didn't know until we showed up the day of. So anyway, I go, you won't go out there without like retaping your stick, and he's like, oh, I won't. So of course he goes out there, and that's the day that coach goes, all right, we're doing our goalie touches. And he whiffed on the first two, and the assistant coach at the time was like, usually he's pretty good. What's going on? Saw he didn't have any tape on his stick. And I get off the ice after practice, and everyone in the locker room is very quiet. And I didn't know why until I left. But they came in and they pulled him aside and just absolutely laid into him because for them it was, oh, he's being lazy, like,
Not prepared. Yeah.
who does he think he is as a freshman? And so it's funny. I was talking to him a couple of weeks ago because he's still playing, and I was like, yeah, like, if you think about it, that was probably my fault, huh? And he's like, you're lucky we're such good buddies. But
Yeah.
that was
Nice. So what's your favorite number to wear and why?
I'm probably gonna get a lot of flack for this one. One, I know that's the most like basic goalie number, but I got thrown into it kind of thing, and then I don't know. I think mom and dad kind of pushed it a little bit too. Like, when you get number one, because it's a goalie number and it happens to be one of your first numbers, and then they start associating you with number one, and then you get used to it. And so that's kind of always been my number. Was lucky enough to have it through college. Until I went to Providence, I had the switch, and I switched to 31 as a tribute to one of my old goalie partners at Western. I'm not super picky with that stuff. Like, the whole lucky number thing. Like I said, I associate myself with the number one, but I was never like, oh, this looks better on a jersey. I tried to stay clear of that mindset for as much as I could, because I felt like, sometimes the anxiety of performance is enough. I don't want to add any fuel to the fire.
I've always said I have the numbers I like, but as long as I get to put a jersey on, I don't care what's on the back of it.
Yeah, exactly right. Like, I remember my last college games, we lose in playoffs, and like, I was the guy to not take the jersey off because of the
Same.
logo on the front, because you don't know when or if you'll put it back on, right? And those are moments that I'll never forget, and it had nothing to do with the
Yeah.
number on the back. So I'm fortunate now where I've got both college jerseys framed. My Providence was the one they gave me, was happened to be my first college shutout too. Was in that
Nice.
jersey that they gave me, and so I've got them framed in two different numbers, but equally as important in different ways. So
I still remember that first time pulling that sweater over my head. It was borderline emotional, because you always had those people that told you couldn't do it, and it's like,
yeah,
here I am, I'm doing it. And then that last game, we actually the Mayak had a postseason for the JV, and we wound up winning the championship. And it was just, I knew it was my last game, and to have to take that off, pull that over my head one last time, it was tough. And I didn't even play that game, and I was the last one to get undressed for a reason. The coach knew. He didn't. There was me and another senior. He wasn't rushing us along. He's like, hey, just make sure you're on the bus when it leaves. That's all. And so it was a
Yeah.
little harder.
Yeah, I was that kid that like you have some seniors crying understandably and it's their last college game and I'm the freshman also crying, where everyone's like, what is he doing? I was definitely that guy. But it's tough, like I find it really difficult now because those are all like, they're testaments to how much you care and how passionate you are and how much you love the game and the position and who you play for and just how special it all is. But, it's weird now. Like I said, I'm not even a year out of it technically, and it's almost like I don't want to say it's like it never happened, but for something that's been such a regular part of my life and a routine every single day to not be doing that, it's weird to look back and like, for a while I had my stuff in my garage and walking out to my car, you kind of turn your shoulder, and it's weird to think about, right? It's a difficult thing. Just like you don't realize how special it is sometimes, but you always remember moments like that.
Well, and
so
I think even COVID drove home to a lot of players too. Is you don't know when that last time you put the equipment is going to be, and so enjoy it every gosh darn time you're out there. It's it's special to be out there. No matter how good or how bad you play.
Yeah, I haven't got myself to jump into beer league or anything yet. I've had some senior A teams reach out to me, and I'm not there yet. But I know that I had always told myself I never would do that. And there isn't really like a good reason why. I'm sure part of it is when you're done, it's like give me a little break, right?
Yeah.
But I know at some point already, I'm sure I'll be back. I don't know when that is.
The beer leagues are great because you get that locker room experience back. You get a little bit of that compete. The biggest thing for me was having played at a level I did. I was expecting things to happen, and they weren't. They weren't happening with some of my teammates, or even the teams come down shooting on me. It's like, all right, we got a 2-on-1. They're either going to shoot, or if they pass, I'm going to get a shot right away. Well, they pass. So I go over ready for the, almost in the butterfly ready for the shot. They bungle the pass, so then they send it back. Well, now I'm already out of position, so I'm scrapping. It's it took a little while for me to lower my compete level, expectations, I should say, to just remember we're out here for fun.
Well, and that's where I don't think I'll be at for a little bit. Is I'm very hard on myself, whether it was with hockey or with anything. I expect a lot. I mentioned I'm an obsessive person, so I expect a lot out of everything around me, and that's a tough thing to turn off. And so, like I said, it hasn't been that long, but the stretching and the hand-eye and all that stuff that I haven't been doing in a long time, I know that the first time I step on, it's still recent enough where I'll have those expectations of myself, and then I won't hit them, and I don't care if I shut out, whatever. I'm walking off the ice still probably pretty upset. And there's also the other side. I know a lot of guys that stop playing and never jumped into the men's league thing. They tried it because there's that, oh, we've got this guy coming in net and this is where he played. So there's that expectation to just like walk in like nothing ever happened. And if sometimes it's pretty chaotic, like you mentioned. It's a bit of a step, right?
Yeah,
so
it's almost harder to play down than it is to play up. I know a lot of goalies who skate out when they're done playing competitively too.
No, like I said, I tried that one and ended up still trying to eat shots. So I don't know that that's in the cards either. So I might just be coach. Be the guy to bring the beer and morale guy.
Coaching is fun too. So the last question, usually my favorite one too, is what advice do you have for young goaltenders?
Oh, it's endless.
Well, I mean, we've already gone 2 hours, so it's another hour.
Yeah, hey, I love this stuff. So we could have a part 8, 9, 10. And it'll always be fresh material with me. Like I said, and now it's part of my job, right? And so I think about this quite frequently, whether it's with my guys or guys we're bringing on, and it's all different levels. But I think the message is the same. And lately, what I've been finding, and I was guilty of this in my playing days too, is I think there's a pretty big issue in like I'm all for watching NHL guys. We should be watching tape. We should be watching
Yeah.
guys learning things, right? But where a lot of goalies go wrong is it's Vasilevsky's my favorite goalie, so I'm going to be Vasilevsky, and I'm going to
Yeah.
right. It's that we talked earlier about realistic versus unrealistic expectation, and it's the whole idea of, well, Price does this and he's in the NHL. So if I do this, then I'm gonna, right, and it just won't happen because there will never be another Price. There will never be another Vasilevsky. That is a guy that trained where I grew up training, and he didn't know a ton of English, but still was somehow one of the funniest guys. But I grew up in juniors, like I was sitting in his meetings where Bauer's pitching to him, and that's where he made the switch from TCM. Or whoever he was with, Brian's, or whoever he was with before. But it was awesome to sit and be a part of that. But like he was a freak, and a lot of the Russian guys, some European, like it's pushed on them so heavily. Like the guy would do a 30-minute boxing workout and then sit in the splits in the middle of the gym for 30 minutes, and that mobility was never in the cards for me.
Right.
And it's not for a lot of people. And a lot of people, like, if you think about, it's not like he was necessarily born that way. There's a work ethic from a young age, where a lot has gone into it. And so it's not as easy as he's athletic, he's tall, I want to play athletic. Rather, I think, what we should be doing is, for example, you've got a goalie who's shorter, and he wants to be Carey Price, not going to happen.
Right.
But he can watch a guy like UC Saros, one of the best goalies in the league. The last couple of years, he's been phenomenal. Well, what's the best part of his game, right? His footwork is unbelievable because it has to be, because he's a smaller guy. And
Mike
so a goalie
Ricker
can
was
look.
the same way.
Yes, exactly, right. And so the goalies can look and say, okay, there's similarities here. What can I take away, rather than this is what he does, this is what I need to do.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, it should be an accumulation of like just as much information as you can get your hands on. Talk to as many people as possible without overcomplicating it. But the whole idea for me was like, what does Austin's game look like, right? Who can I identify with? What parts of the game, right? Like what helps me, instead of just doing it, running through the motions, because in my head, that's what'll get me where I want to be. And I think that's where a lot of goalies go wrong. But it does make a big difference. You stop trying to be someone else and figure out what works for you.
Yeah, it's wholeheartedly agree. I remember my youth goalie coach. He'd say, "Hey, you guys like Belfour? You try and emulate his giant 5-hole. Don't. You like Felix Potvin and he's got that glove turned this way? Don't." He said they can do that because they're good. You guys aren't. You got to play your game. You got to learn the basics. They got that way because they're freaks of nature. You're not. He was very honest. Yeah. Like, they can do that. You can't. Maybe one day you'll be good enough where you can do something quirky, but not today. Not in my clinics.
Well, and glove hand's a perfect example, right? I've seen some crazy stances, and if guys are playing at a certain level, you just don't question it. You don't change it, right? But like it works for them. Doesn't mean it'll work for you. And glove hand was like, I was, until my last year of college, I was rocking 2 blockers. I was not great. I felt like I was like, that was the one part of my stance where I was constantly holding it in different positions. And
damn Blackburn out there.
Yeah, right. But like, I think a lot of goalies go through that where, I've played with guys that, okay, they had a tough couple games, so let's switch up sizes of equipment or brands of equipment, or start doing this, start doing that. And that's never a good sign, right? So there's definitely something to be said for trying everything and seeing what works, right? But we got to be realistic about it and not overcomplicate it. At the end of the day, like, I'm not in the NHL because I was wearing X equipment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
that was my nephew. He was a forward, and it was like every 2-3 weeks he was telling his mom, I need a new stick. That's, and it was always changing from Bauer to a Warrior to see, and it was always because I can't score with this one. And my brother-in-law, he played junior hockey, he played college hockey, went to North Dakota for a year before he went back to Division III. And, him and I are looking at each other going, maybe it's not the stick, maybe it's the shooter. And we would say that to my nephew. My nephew's older, he's got a kid now and everything. And, we joke about it. He's like, yeah, it wasn't all those sticks. I just wasn't very good at shooting the puck. I could play the body, but I couldn't shoot the puck.
well, the guy playing in the NHL using that same stick also was probably taking 100 shots a day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So.
But it was funny. Like I need the new $300 stick out there because this other $290 stick I have isn't working. No, the stick is working. It's user error. But when you're 10, 12 years old, you're not thinking that way. But no,
not at all.
Yeah, I was gonna say I appreciate your time. We've been talking 2 hours now. It's been a great conversation. I think we could probably talk all night, and given the chance, we probably would. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Like I said, was super pumped to be able to do this, and the goalie community is small. We got to stick together, right? So opportunity to just share some experience. Like I've always said, what good was mine if I can't pass it on, and so that's part of the work that I do. And so again, I appreciate just giving Goalie Voice a platform here, exclusive club. So it's fun to be a part of, and I can't thank you enough.
Well, I love it because one of the things we miss when we stop playing competitive is the locker room, the conversation, and the podcast is an outlet for some of that. And that's what I love about it. And I mean, I've had all the goalies on that I've pretty much played with already, and some that I played against, and so it's just to be able to continue that network of goalies, and it's been fun. Some of the goalies I've had on the podcast, it's like I connected with somebody they knew, and they're like, "Oh, you got to talk." Don Strauss, perfect example. He technically wasn't a goalie, but he designed the armadillo mask and painted Van Beeswick. It's like I had somebody else the fellow from Vintage Goalie on. He's like, "You got to talk to Don." He made the introduction. It's like, there we go. Now I've had great conversations with both, and I feel like if we're ever in the same part of the North America, we're getting together for beers to continue talking goaltending.
Oh yeah, there'll be a couple for sure. But I mean it's and I'm sure you've seen it, right? Like when you start from scratch something like what you're doing, I'm sure there's a bit of a cold outreach for those first couple people, and then it has to just be funneling ever since, right? Because somebody knows this guy or knows this guy, and everybody wants to talk especially the goalies, right?
It's funny because I mean I reached out to you from the GGSU goalie page. I just started going through because I took a little bit of a hiatus from the podcast. We moved from Minnesota to Atlanta at the beginning of summer, and the move, well, we're happy with it. Some things have happened since then. My in-laws moved with us. We lost my father-in-law shortly after. Been renovating our kitchen. So it's like, you know what? I need a break. So I took the break and I'm like, I need to get back into it. So I was like, all right, let's go to the GGSU page because, well, everybody talks about needing to clean their stuff out with cat pee. It's like, we're also good at helping each other out for things like this. And reach out to you and a couple others are absolutely, you know what, let's get it scheduled. So, but I am one of those people, I try not to rely on others to, I don't want to say use their connections, but it's like, I've had Connor Beaupre on it. I'm not like, Connor, I need to talk to your dad now. I think I've reached, when we talk, we're like, we're going to have to get his side of some of these stories, but I haven't, text him like, hey, buddy, help me get him on the podcast. No, I try not to do that. But knowing that you have a connection to Corey Crawford, I might have to on that one. He's one of my white elephants, and he's not an easy guy to track down because he doesn't talk much. He's a quiet guy.
No, yeah, he jumped off the radar when he stopped playing. But yeah, no, he'd be a good one. Like I said, there's I think the best part about it is everybody's had their own unique experience to getting where they got, and that's something that's always fascinated me and been part of why I'm really big on let's have as many conversations as possible, right? And you learn a lot by doing that, and and who's willing to talk. And so there's a ton of guys that, you know, I could name that I know would love to do something like
Yeah.
this, that are,
Well,
you know, current goalie coaches or current pro goalies, or like the list is endless, right? And
send them my
everyone would be happy
way.
to do it.
I'm happy to
Yeah.
talk to if you've played goal, and some of the people I've had on have only been between the pipes once or twice. It's like if you've put the pads on, you qualify for the podcast. So, well, again, thank you. Much appreciated. I'm sure we're going to keep in touch and, you know, send messages back and forth, I'm sure. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it. And yeah, it's been fun.
Awesome. I'm going to hit end here. So safe to say, Austin and I had a bit to talk about. And I know we could have probably continued talking for another 2 hours if we wanted. I'm sure that won't be the last time the two of us talk goaltending, though. Be sure to follow Austin on Instagram and Twitter, or X, or whatever it's called these days, at @Cainer and the number 1. That's ACAINER1. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube simply by searching for Wash Up Goalie, and I'll pop up. Visit washupgoalie.com for some great hockey-related content, my beer league hockey video highlights, and of course, all podcast episodes. If you want some Wash Up Goalie or Tendy Talk apparel in the new year, be sure to visit my Threadless shop by clicking the merchandise link on my website. If you like this podcast, go listen to the BLPA Big Show. It's the OG BLPA Podcast Network show where a couple of beer league players talk beer league hockey, draft experience shenanigans, and exploits from around the game. Be sure to check out the full lineup of hockey-related podcasts on the Hockey Podcast Network as well. There are too many lists here, but shows like the Grindline Podcast, the One for One with Miles and Nolan podcast, and the New World Oilers podcast can all be found. I need to thank the band The Zambonis for allowing me to use their music on my episodes. You can download their music on iTunes or listen wherever you stream music from. And as always, I'm working on lining up other goalies to talk to. If you are a goalie or have connections to a goalie who I should talk to, shoot me an email at washupgoalie39@gmail.com or send me a DM on social media. And let's not forget, if you are a brand that wants to sponsor the show, be sure to reach out. I'd be happy to talk. And finally, if you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe, rate, and comment on the podcast platform you're listening on. It's a quick action on your part that helps others find Tendy Talk. So, until next time, keep your stick on the ice and your body square to the puck.
Yeah, Dave.
Hey, have you checked out the pond today?
Funny you ask. I was just down there this morning.
Yeah, any good news?
Well, Dave, the pond